Two short passages from much earlier in the Word. Joshua is distributing the cities of the Levites, as we read in the first lesson. Earlier in both Deuteronomy and Numbers, the books of Moses, those cities were described and some of the conditions related to the cities of refuge. You shall select, it says in Numbers 35, suitable cities, which can be cities of refuge for yourselves, that one who strikes and kills another accidentally may flee to them. If without premeditation, without enmity, he pushes him or throws at him some implement without forethought and strikes him with a stone and he dies, while not seeing him perhaps, so that it causes the stone to fall upon him and he dies. Though he was not his enemy, he didn't seek to harm him. In the case of one who kills, he shall be able to flee that he may live when he has struck his companion unwittingly. He did not hate him previously, as when he goes with his companion into the forest to cut down timber. And when the hand with his axe, as he's swinging, falls off, or the iron flies off the handle and hits his companion so that his companion dies, that person shall flee to one of the cities of refuge that he may live. And the third lesson concerning these cities of refuge, when they're spoken of in the word, the explanation given about them is found in the Arcana. This describes the state of one who is blameless and freed from punishment, who, spiritually speaking, through falsities of their own faith or the things they believe to be true, from factual knowledges based on sometimes the illusion of the senses, when one person has injured someone else, so that he's done harm to that other person's spiritual life. To convey this idea, this meaning, an accident of chance is described as an implement of some kind, like a stone, which a person causes to fall upon his companion so that he dies. And also an axe, or the iron of an axe, flying off its handle while both were cutting wood or cutting timber in the forest. Cutting down timber means to argue about what is good, using what the teachings of one's religion or one's belief system are. Anyone can see that, but for some hidden reason, this kind of killing which occurs accidentally would not have been described as the iron or the axe flying off its handle in the forest, for such an accident rarely happens, scarcely once in many years, it says. But this accident has been described in this way for the sake of the internal sense, which describes that the harm that is done to a person through the false beliefs or the false systems of someone else, because their beliefs teach this, and they believe those beliefs strongly. For when anyone causes harm through falsities or misunderstandings which they believe to be truths, they do not hurt the other person from set purpose, or to spite them, or because they think they know better and want to hurt the other. Because a person is acting according to their faith and their beliefs, and therefore they're acting so often out of zeal. The iron of the axe flying off its handle stands for truth separated from good. Good being meant by the wood of the handle. And those companions cutting timber together represents the discussion of matters of controversy, calling things into question. For the forest means a person's religious system or their belief system. Amen. Now, Imagine that happening to you. Maybe an accident similar like that has happened. You were doing something with some dangerous equipment. Didn't seem that dangerous perhaps at the time, but accidents happen. People will, I know, gotten out of a car, forgot to put it in park or put the brake on, and it's slowly gone down the driveway and hit something or somebody. Accidents happen. And situations in the world just happen. Well, putting this back together isn't very hard. And making amends can be a lot more difficult. When accidents do happen, though, imagine if I handed this to 6 people and I handed this to 8 people and I said, put it back together, okay? And imagine how hard that might be for 6 people all trying to figure out how to put it together, and 4 other people or 8 people trying to put... Imagine giving a needle and thread to 3 people and say, okay, all of you hold it and put it back together. You know, some things when you make a mistake or when things go bad, you have to handle it on your own. The Lord put himself by means of the Levite, the priesthood, the service of the Levites, into every province, every tribe, every territory. 4 for each province and territory. And said, teach the people, be their leaders, be my representatives there. There's nowhere in our lives where the Lord is saying, well, in that particular case over there, you don't need any of the Levites because this has nothing to do with Israel. This has nothing to do with you people. So, you know, this tribe of Dan, you don't need, no Levites need to, no. Every tribe, those 12 tribes represent every aspect of our lives. Every aspect. From the simplest things, most external things, to the most interior things. So the sermon could be about each one of those 12 tribes and how they correspond to something in our lives. But the sermon's about the one common thread in each of those tribes, and that is the tribe of the Levites were to have cities where they could represent the presence of the Lord to everyone. That's why we have a church. That's why we set aside ministers, servants of the Lord, to represent those things that are of the Lord's word, to be present with the people. We've been struggling to open up the church, and it's taken a long time because we're trying to put the good and the truth back together again. And you hand the committee the task, and it takes a long time for 6 or 8 or 12 people to put things together. But it's been done, and it's not going to be perfect. And I want to talk about that a little bit because it's controversial. Don't we have enough controversy? Well, that's why there are actually 6 special cities from among those 48 where the Lord says when you get into trouble and accidents happen and things go bad, you fight with somebody, you say something you didn't really want to say, you fly off the handle. Has that ever happened to you? You get a little zealous about what you believe, and you fly off the handle telling somebody else what they ought to believe or what they think is crazy. Or it's so easy, isn't it? And that's what this flying off the handle part represents. We do that. We're passionate. We love strongly. We want to protect those things we love, and that's so important. And when we see the things threatened that we love, we can fly off the handle. We can say and do things that actually hurt the people around us because we're so zealous. And, you know, it's not like this is new. Right? What we're doing right now is different than what we've ever done. But it's not new to have problems with each other. It's so old, it's said to be the oldest controversy in the church. The oldest dispute in the church is this separation of good and truth, the handle from the axe head. It's what caused Cain to slew Abel. It's what caused the serpent to say, "Why don't you try this?" It's that separation of the truth from the good. And it's been an argument and a discussion, it says in the word of the teachings in the new church, excuse me, it's been an argument since the beginning, which is the firstborn, the most important? Faith or charity? Esau and Jacob struggled in their mother's womb. They represent the goodness and the truth of the church. They struggle. Which is firstborn? Esau. But Jacob managed to be a supplanter and sort of took over. He becomes the one where the line of the children of Israel descends. And it's easy to see truth is really the most important thing, because without the truth we're lost. Without the light we can't see. But in fact, it's good. That is the more important thing. It's only the good within truth that makes it true. But when things go awry, or if things fly off the handle, all we're focusing in so often is just the truth. What does this mean? What does that mean? How do we interpret this? How do we interpret that? The oldest controversy of the church. In the Word, there's a series. I mean, the Word's just filled with fights, right? One fight after another. And especially the section that we're studying in this series, it's Joshua conquering the land. It's going to be one fight after another, from Joshua, Judges on through Kings onward. Because we have to fight within ourselves to know what's true. And more especially, how to make charity most important. That is a struggle. So there's a passage that talks about the servants of Abraham, and later on the servants of his son Isaac, contending with the shepherds in the area over this well and that well. Whose well is it? And they fight. And it represents this series of discussions and arguments that have to do with what's more important, what I think or what you think. It says people will dispute anything so deeply and so intently that they'll actually lose sight of what they're fighting about. Has that ever happened to you and your partner, your spouse? You get into a deep fight, you're like arguing, and you look back the next day and you go, what was it we were fighting about? I don't know, something to do with the dresser, or I don't know, was it the car? And you might know, but you think, well, what was the fight about? Why are we so angry? So oftentimes the anger blinds us, the emotion, the feelings, the loves, blind us to remembering what it was that was so important. And again, that's talked about in the Word. It's talked about in the writings in a number of different places. People will deny things such as life after death, the resurrection of the dead, the last judgment, heaven and hell. They'll start arguing about things and pulling in ideas and philosophies and realize they're just actually wanting to fight. There's something that can be bred in us as we're growing up, where the big energy in the family was like who was right and who was wrong and how you proved you were right. And you might not have had that exactly in your family. It might have been a little different. But it's something so much in our nature as spiritually minded, that is not celestially minded, people to parse out the truth in certain ways. In the other world, you'll get a chance to figure out what all your fights were, what they were all about. It's a very fascinating passage in the spiritual diary about Swedenborg coming to see something. He says it's very usual, it's very, very common in the other world for a person to be reduced to their infantile or their adolescent states so completely that they do not know otherwise than that they are in infancy, boyhood, or adolescence. And perhaps you say to yourself, the last thing I ever want to do is repeat those middle school years. Oh my goodness, they're so hard. You don't have to do this, but it's very common for people actually to revert back under a safe, spiritually angelic, therapeutic environment, revert back to a state of their adolescence, when some big mistakes can be made, or your childhood, when some big upsets can happen. And so there's an experience that he is showing about a certain one was now reduced to that state of being a boy. And at that point, that person didn't know anything other than that they were a young boy. And they spoke that way. And then they came into a state which was similar to their early adolescence. And he was there then with his parents and his ancestors in that state, thinking and feeling to himself as he was when he was an adolescent. And it was brought up that he had done something had happened that affected his ability for his parents to love him. What was it? It doesn't say, but it could be that he had an accident and was disfigured or crippled, and somehow his parents couldn't love him a certain way. It doesn't explain, just it says some actuality. Something actually happened, something he had contracted or done. But then the love of the parents toward their child could not be displayed then. But now, in this spiritual setup, this spiritual therapeutic condition, the love of his parents were then actualized by what is the love called storge, and they loved him tenderly. Something that he hadn't gotten when he was a little boy or a young teenager. They loved him tenderly. Their love was also communicated to me, Swedenborg says. And then he spoke in such a manner as if he were a boy. And it made his parents indignant. Well, that never happens, right? I mean, teenagers never say anything that get their parents like indignant. Teenagers never roll their eyes when we tell them something and we get like indignant. Of course, it happens all the time, right? So he's in that state, he's reverting to that state, his filters or his barriers or whatever are down, and he says something and the parents are indignant. It made the parents indignant because he spoke about a controversy that he had with his brother when they were children. He said, he's going to take away everything. So imagine a grown man being brought into that state. And maybe you don't have to imagine too much, because lots of times grown-ups revert back to acting like children. We'll do that. It's in us. It's going to be in us in the other world. So in this circumstance, the boy said to his parents, I want everything. He's going to take everything. I want everything. Obviously, they were having a fight. And it wasn't just like a one-time thing from the way this is described. His infantile state could then be perceived that he wanted to take away everything, take away the love of his parents. And inasmuch as there was much infantile or young adolescent feeling to this, the parents loved him and comforted him, but they said he couldn't take away all their love. And then it was perceived that that brother, who had died in infancy, or infancy in the writings, but it could be childhood, that brother who had died, now a man, was present. And he made it to his brother, the one that was in this spiritual experience of being brought back to his childhood. It was made it known to him by the other brother, you can have everything. Have it. It's yours. The brother showed the one that is the subject here, a tender love. And the brother was so affected that his opposition melted away and he shed tears. Wonderful illustration of, family fights, things between siblings, between parents and children, parents and our children. They can take over and color everything that goes on in our lives. And oftentimes a family feud will go for generations over something, over some controversy. And it's very sad. We can't just leave it behind, as this illustrates. We're going to take that with us. If we have this thing against somebody because they don't see things the way we do, it doesn't help just to move out to British Columbia and never have to deal with them again. Lots of times people do that. Lots of times children just leave wherever their parents and their other family members are and go way off. The thing about it is, as it says in one, it's a saying, no matter where you go, there you are. You're going to take it with you. And you're going to take it with you to the other world. If you fly off the handle with your relatives here, you're going to keep flying off the handle with other people. Unless, of course, we're talking about some toxic situation that's very sick in your family or in your group, and you need to just leave the toxicity behind. Okay. In this circumstance, this child had a difficulty with his brother, had a controversy, wanted to take everything, couldn't have his parents' love for whatever had happened, and now in the other world it's reconciled because the other brother says, have it. Angelic disposition is to say, if you want what I have, take it. I'll give you everything. Angels, it said, would die to bring one devil out of hell. They'd be willing to sacrifice themselves. That's what spiritual and celestial love does for us. And how often are we in that state? It's very difficult. But the stuff that we carry around out of these controversies, when things fly off the handle or when injuries are done, and you may be the avenger for blood, which the person going to the city of refuge is leaving behind the danger of the avenger of blood, the family member who says, you killed my brother, I'm going to kill you. And when you find the person holding on to the altars of the city of refuge, you can't touch him. He's found a place where he's safe. Even though he did something horrible. Even though he should have checked that axe head and figured out that it's going to fly off the handle while you're cutting wood out in the forest with my brother or my father or my sister. You should have done it. The avenger of blood is looking for blame because he is really zealous for what he has lost, what he has loved. Who's now missing because of the foolish mistakes somebody else made? Who's worse off in this situation? Who's worse off in that situation with the brother in the other world? The one that is carrying around in his adult life, carrying around that anger about what his brother had done to him, that he wanted to steal his parents' love. The one that's carrying around that anger of the person who should have known better, making a mistake, and it cost me. And you're going to carry around, or I'm going to carry around my anger at that person because he flew off the handle, something happened, an accident took place, and he's regretful, he's seeking refuge, but you're still carrying around the anger. In the other world, hopefully we resolve and come to a place where this sort of thing that had happened in this memorable relation can take place with us. We can resolve that. But sometimes we have to be reduced to that state where the bad thing happened. The controversy welled up. You in anger said this or that. Your parents will be there. Your angelic parents, if not your physical ones, somebody in a position of guardianship will be there to help you. Resolve and mature And other people will basically say, if you really want it that bad, it's yours. It brought that man to tears. Controversies are hard, and if we hang on to them and decide we're going to stick with the fight no matter what, it can oftentimes do us a whole lot more danger as the avenger for the goodness than it does the person who we disagree with who's taken a different position. A fascinating story in the Word about Luther. Luther died long before the Last Judgment of 1757 took place, and he accumulated quite the following of people who would come to him to hear him, and he'd speak. And he was, in the middle of a controversy because he wanted to reform his church. And he did. He was the beginning of the reformers. And he loved being that man. Swedenborg says, I spoke with him occasionally. I came to understand his point of view, and people would come to talk with him, especially those who favored what he says. And in our world, we talk about the algorithms on the internet or on social media, the way studies are done that let people who we're working with in the internet know what we like. We say what we like all the time. And we end up end up in a sort of an echo chamber of affirmation for the things that we've said that people say they like. And then we'll have advertisements showed about things that we've mentioned, things like that. It's interesting how right on this is with Luther. He would have people come that would say, really love you, Luther, good job, Reformation went really well, that was 100 years ago on earth, and can we just sit at your feet and listen to you talk more about how bad the Catholic Church is? We love the controversy. And Luther loved the attention. So it says Swedenborg visited with him. It says he learned an art of persuasion which in the spiritual world is so effective no one can resist. No one can controvert what he was asserting. This art, however, was of such a nature of enchantment which the ancients used that it became strictly forbidden from speaking this way from persuasion. Therefore, Luther had to change his style. He had to get a new platform. So he couldn't just be sucking people in by means of the persuasive way he had of speaking that would stop controversy, that would stop discussion, that would stop arguing. Nobody was allowed, and people who came in would be cast under an enchanting spell in his presence with all the other people who thought he was great. So that there was you can't talk. You can't bring that up. And the people that would come in would go, oh, why did I think that was so important? Everybody here believes this. And eventually that was dismissed. That was something that was happening in the spiritual world from ancient times, that power of persuasion to shut people down to even ask a question. They wonder, why would I have even asked that question? Once you're in that sphere, in that presence. So Swedenborg, it says, saw that Luther was doing that. And then as the Last Judgment took place in 1757, we're told it was observed that the numbers that resorted to him daily were decreasing. More and more people, as the Last Judgment was taking place, could actually ask the questions that needed to be asked about the system that he was pushing, and his numbers started going down. And it's like, why didn't I get 20,000 likes yesterday? I only had 5,000, and now I only have 6,000 and 4,000 and 3. So the numbers were decreasing. And it said he could actually begin to talk with Swedenborg more familiarly about his understanding of the Word. And at length he began to change his mind. By this point, Swedenborg says, he was with me daily. And he began laughing at his former views, which were in direct opposition to the Word. And he said to me, quote, "Do not wonder that I seized upon faith alone as justifying, depriving charity of its spiritual essential nature. I took away from people their free will in spiritual things, besides teaching many other dogmas which depended on so many links in a chain upon faith alone. When that is once received, my object was to break away from the Catholic Church. And this end I couldn't do any other way but by means of this argument. I do not wonder, therefore, that I erred." You saw the error of his ways in the light that was coming by means of the last judgment taking place and the second coming of the Lord being present. "I don't wonder that I erred, but I do wonder that the folly of one man should make so many others foolish." Something for us to reflect upon at all points in our lives. To recognize that really important people can make mistakes. Luther was the leader of what became all the Protestant churches. So any Christian church basically that isn't Catholic today was based on what this man had done. And he did it for a specific reason of getting rid of the abuses taking place in the Catholic Church at that time. He erred. The end, he said, well, it didn't really justify the means, but the means worked, and so the end happened, and yeah, I broke away from the Catholic Church. But he saw the error of his ways later on. He said, but amazing that so many people, I made an error and I was foolish, but so many people believed me. Well, there's so many good things to talk about when it comes to controversy. Our church has seen so many controversies. Are you familiar with the Oden-Acton controversy about the nature of in the spiritual world? Publications were shut down because people got tired and just didn't want to have any more arguments. Are you familiar with the controversy about wine and the Holy Supper? That was a controversy too. And again, certain of our publications shut down. It's like, don't want to talk about it anymore. It's too upsetting for people. Then there was the Dutch position controversy about the nature of the internal sense of the word and the internal sense of the writings. And after a while, people were told, stop talking about it. It was no longer published in the periodicals. Just don't dispute. And that can become the attitude that we can have when controversial things are being raised. Shut the other person down. There's a great plea in New Church Life from 1903, 1905, talking about we need to be able to have a discussion. We need to be able to talk about these controversial things. Because if we don't air what we believe, we're just going to actually close down inside. And when Swedenborg talks about Luther and Luther's change of mind and heart, it's in that section in the True Christian Religion at the very end that talks about all these different nations and how different nations have different ways of handling controversy. And that in Italy, among the Roman Catholics, there is a closed system. You can't raise certain ideas or certain things cannot be published. And that was prevalent during the time of Swedenborg. He had to go to another country. Sweden wouldn't allow the publication of his teachings. He had to go to Holland or England to publish, to air these things that were controversial. It's coming on Christmas. They're cutting down trees. We're putting up light, singing songs of joy and peace, and Herod's there. Always in the background. Herod's part of the story because we each have our own Herod. Things that have to come up and have to do their job in order to get things moving. We can't shut down and stop discussion about things we don't want to hear again about one more time. We have to remain open. Which is why the Word is from Genesis all the way through to Revelation, one series of fights. From Cain and Abel at the beginning to the woman and the dragon at the end. It's controversy and struggle because that is the nature of our spiritual lives. We have to be able to have those struggles, whether it's internally right now in our minds whether it's externally, what's going on in the world, we have to treat each other with love and compassion and recognize that people are on different sides of controversial issues. And that during those different sides, when things are discussed, chopping wood in the forest, things fly off the handle and people are hurt. Most important thing is that our church, this sanctuary, can be a sanctuary where those hurts can be healed. Where we can recognize our neighbor, and no matter what they disagree or agree with us, we can recognize our need to say, this is a refuge. We want to feel safe to worship the Lord, not feel like we've got to keep our shoulder prepared for some onslaught. So we don't want to bring controversy like that into the church. We need to leave it at the door. We need to resolve the things in our own minds and in our own hearts outside so that we can come and listen to the Lord's word, these teachings that the Lord gives us, and carry on with the conflicts that we have. But not with each other openly, that we're going to end up flying off the handle and hurting somebody. One-on-one, in a safe environment, okay. But we're opening up the church for people to come back. It's not perfect. We know that. We're trying our best to accommodate to the states of a broad spectrum of people. And we're not going to do it perfectly. We're going to come to church. Please come back to church. Please be able to worship here, where we can see each other, even if we can't talk in the hallways. But we can worship together. Because that's what the Lord wants to do. He wants to call us out of the world into the sanctuary, into the refuge, where we can openly acknowledge sins before Him, where we can openly pray for forgiveness, where we can openly praise Him for giving us the light of truth, that when we walk in darkness, we can have that great light. When we're in the shadow of the valley, the shadow of death, we can see the greatness of the Lord. Amen.